is, I to your point, I had a buddy who is a programmer, coder, unbelievably talented, and got promoted to a leadership position to be a manager in charge of people, lead the team, and he didn't want to do it. And he ended up going back, and he made the choice, and he said, you know what, I don't want to lead. I don't want to lead people. I want to just do my work, and I don't want to manage anybody. And he had that self-awareness to know, you know what, thanks, but no thanks. And he made that choice. And it's okay to make the opposite choice. Not everyone has to be a leader. Not everyone has to, be dedicated to that path. It's okay to make that choice. And that was good self-leadership by him, because he knew that wasn't his path. So that was this cool little story that I found out about a month ago, so it's pretty relevant.
Yeah, and just the way you described it right there, which is the self-leadership. He didn't want to lead.
Yep.
But that was, if you're not running from fear, if you just say, okay, and I know why, it's just not my thing, that is a choice. And there's a song, and it's same artist with the opening music with Rush, but it's even if you choose not to decide, it's still a choice. And I laugh because that lyric has been around for a good 40 years, but the older I've gotten, the more I've realized, wait a second, I'm not choosing not to decide right now because I'm afraid. I go, you know what, I just don't feel the need, sometimes to make this choice. I can keep my options in front of me. And that's where I think we put too much pressure on. This is a leadership position. Lead, decide right now. It's this or it's that. When that's really not helping them lead, and you're just saying flip a coin. So with some of that now, let's get into your book. You talked about before, your sports leadership guide, because again, we can talk about these things, but here on this show we want to get into, but seriously, how do you do that? Not that this 60 minutes is going to cure everything, but let's get into how did you enable people just through that book, do you think? What are some of the key topics in that book?
Well, I think some of the key topics is, one of the things that happens a lot within colleges with teams is we're talking about a lot of interpersonal relationships happening at a very emotional time, right? And then everyone has expectations. And what happens is a lot is when we have expectations going into things, and then people don't they don't have the same expectations, it can create a lot of conflict and stress within that. And so some of the things that are really important to take away. I mean, the whole model of emotional intelligence, the way I use it in the book is pretty important, just because, we look at the 5 main parts of this model, and then there's 3 subscales that go under each of them, and we look through it at a lens. But when you're talking about, college athletics, the main things you're going to want to think about is, okay, these kids are stressed. What is their stress tolerance like? What is their level to handle stress? And obviously they're collegiate athletes, so they can handle a lot of stress, but what is the actual and physical implication of this stress as well? And so when I was in college and when I was an athlete, like I said earlier in my intro, as a leader, being able to be in a position where people can come to you and just talk about life and talk about other things. And this is what's going on with school. And this is what's going on in my relationship with my significant other. And hey, why didn't I start this week? Can we talk about that? Because these type of things build up over time. And what happens is you obviously, we talk so much about the mindset of an athlete, but what a lot of people miss, and I hope to change this over, I think it's going to take a lot of time, but I hope to be someone who helps change this, is we forget to understand that our emotions can be attached to the physical. And if we are stressed, then we're going to find things are happening to us physically. And I'll give you an example. There's a wonderful, wonderful athlete that I was lucky enough to work with, and he keeps getting injured. And I can tell you right now, the reason he's getting injured is because he holds all of his emotions in. He doesn't have an outlet for him. He has very, very high expectations of himself, and he feels like he lets his dad down if he doesn't meet these expectations that he just created in his head out of nowhere. And so, for me, being able, a very relevant and quick, not a quick solution, but something that a leader in an athletic program can implement right away is start being that person and building that trust so people can come to you and be able to have this outlet. Because I do believe that the stress really does impact performance. And so that's one of the main things that an athlete can do. We talk a lot about conflict management. So we talk about the Thomas Kilmann conflict type indicator and understanding what type of players you have on your team, because you obviously have different personalities, which mean different things. But knowing and trying to figure out and just watch and just when things happen, just take a quick second before interacting and say, what happened really quick? Why did it happen? Who said what? And if you start kind of going through that process and you learn to do it really, really fast, you can start understanding what type of conflict modes that your players have, and then you can address it appropriately. And I can give you an example is, I had players that did not take well to yelling. Well, coaching and yelling is kind of a part of college athletics. I was a soccer player, so there was a lot of communication on the field. Obviously, there's communication all the time in sports, but when things would go wrong and he felt attacked, he just completely folded. And so when I knew I had to, bring something up to him or I had to criticize him, one could not be in front of the entire team. If it was in front of the other team, immediate walls up defense. And then two, so I had to pull him aside. And then two, I always had to make sure we walked through the process of like the whole situation. I couldn't just take out that one little thing that person did wrong. I had to make sure okay, so we were over here, this was going on. Awesome. Okay. And then, okay, so over here, when you turned here, okay, just take a look over there, see where, John is. If we just go back to John, we can work our way out this way, and then we just don't get stuffed up over there. Does that make sense? Oh, yeah, that makes total sense. Okay, cool. I was like, but good stuff on the way before, like way to control the ball before, and just that positive reinforcement I'm a big believer in. You got to have balance, yin and yang. And so being able to understand just how your players perceive communication and in conflict is huge. I was able to defuse. Oh my God, I was a firefighter. It was like every single thing that would flare up, I could immediately put out because I really did take the time to know my players, build the trust, which is so important when it comes to leadership in athletics, is just having that trust, because you can then use a little amount of words for a big amount of impact. And so we talk a lot about communication in the book. We talk a lot about the different types of players that you'll meet. You're going to meet the why guy. I call him a great why guy because he was the whole basis around this section of the book, and he knows that, and I love him, and we still talk to this day. And when I call him, he's like, "What's up, Captain? How you doing?" Great kid. And but he was the why guy. Okay, guys, we got to do this, we got to do this, why? Everything was why. Everything was back. And so, I had to learn to overcome that. So how do you deal with the why guy? How do you deal with the player who thinks he's, Messi on the soccer field, the best player, yet he keeps getting benched because his self-awareness and reality testing is so low? And so how do you communicate with that type of people? How do you communicate and deal with the player who is the best but isn't buying into the team culture that this is a team thing and he thinks the team revolves around him? So those type of realistic things are in the book, all the way to as little as how do you deal with your team that's acting obnoxious in the lunchroom and that are kind of putting a damper in the brand of whatever your team is on that campus. How do you handle them while keeping the respect and trust in this situation where there's now public people watching? How do you not throw your players under the bus if you lose the game? If you're walking down the hallway and someone wants to know, hey, Scott, what happened yesterday at the game? Okay, well, that's an immediate, what I call small L, little leadership, and then there's the big L, which is the hoorah stuff. But how do you deal with that? And how do you, not throw your coaches under the bus in the program? And, you can't say, oh, well, the goalie should have, stopped those 3 goals that were super easy. And you can't say that, you got to find a better way to do that. And so giving them these realistic step-by-step little things, and it's written in that way and in that language that it's really conversational, and it's manual size, so they can literally keep it with them. And if something happens, they can pull it out and say, okay, what would Scott do in this situation? Or maybe there's something in here that'll just help me deal with this right now. Excellent.
Now, how have you avoided teaching them sound bites? Because we learned sound bites just from movies and TVs. I mean, they're everywhere, where you could say, with something we're just going to have to talk about later on, and it's the cliches. It's really nothing that you feel like you're leading. So how do you prevent these young adults from taking that manual and saying, oh, I see, I need to connect and not throw them under the bus, but unintentionally just be insincere?
Yeah, it all just comes down to little actions, I think. Repetition is the key to anything. And so once you start in that process of repetition, of genuine influence and genuine sincerity and genuine follow-up and being someone of your word, those things then tend to come automatically, and you can find yourself avoiding situations, because you don't want to be in a situation where, okay, we'll talk about that later, I can't deal with that right now, or those little sound bites or whatever.
Right.
So those little actions. I'm a big believer and preacher in anything you do. A lot of little things lead up to make a whole big thing, right? If I take one individual Cheerio one at a time, I'm eventually going to get a big bowl of Cheerios, right? So, I believe that, doing these things in repetition is key. And, again, going back to emotional intelligence is why it's kind of a constant in what I do, is because we can work on the self-awareness and see where you think you're doing this type of stuff versus when you are actually doing this type of stuff. And we can work on that. And then what happens is you start to discover your own personal and social cues where, oh, I caught myself again. Okay, wait, no, I got to do this, and hopefully that is what the outcome becomes.
Excellent. And I think that's the key thing. It's there are plenty of books that say don't do this, do more of that. But if it's not putting it in, it is always about the delivery, and that's what writing is all about, and putting information out there. But it's the context, it's the story, and it's a way that someone can picture themselves doing it. So I just like right there that, people say, well, I can't really help if someone doesn't use my method correctly. And some people I've talked to haven't thought about that part. So I can see why you are having success. And with that now, you've got workshops. There's a few. And one of them, because we talked earlier about how you grew up in your dad's teaching, your dad's karate school. You've got some workshops that revolve around karate.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. So, there's a lot of self-leadership in the martial arts, because when you train, you're with a lot of people, but it really is about you and the discovery of you. And so when I was thinking of this workshop and how I was going to build it, I was thinking of things like, it originally started with like self-leadership and leadership, because there's principles in the martial arts that I believe create a good leader: modesty, courtesy, integrity, self-control, perseverance, indomitable spirit. These type of things will translate into a good person, which should then translate into a good leader if they get into that position. That's just one facet of it. And so when I was building it, it started with that. And then I realized, as I was thinking about the dojo back in New York where I grew up, and I was like, wow, you know what? What a culture. Like, why do we have this culture? And I started dissecting it and realizing there were certain things that were happening just through the training of the martial arts, that was bringing people together. And we had this family, in the karate school. And, you hear that word a lot, family when in sports, and especially college sports. And so